Well, hello and welcome to 110 Zoom session, Unit 6, Upward Spread of Masking. This Zoom session originally intended to be held tomorrow, Tuesday, April 17th, as I look on my calendar. However, this being May, and May being Speech and Hearing Month, I've been away at a few conferences, just like I was last week. And so we are holding our Zoom session that's supposed to be Tuesday, April 17. We're holding that a day early, Monday, April 16th. Now, this, of course, you've had no notice of this whatsoever, and so I would be blown away if anybody was attending this thing with me. No matter, I'll just talk into the computer, and it is recorded. And so I have sent everyone an email to this effect, and I've also put an announcement on 110. So regarding the fact that I won't be here tomorrow to do your 110 Zoom session, so ding dong, I'm doing it today. All right, today's topic is the upward spread of masking. So why don't we look at that now? Let's share screen. And by the way, this is the second last of our topics, because all we've got here after this is non-electronic acoustic modifications in hearing aids, Unit 7. So this unit here, this kind of completes our coverage of psychoacoustics. Psychoacoustics in this course, as you know, was covered in Units 4, 5, and 6. Last week we did Unit 5. Actually, I think I did that puppy on Friday. Anyway, making up for the Tuesday that I was away. And that was, we covered Unit 5. That was loudness and pitch, where we talked about fawns and mells and all of that stuff. Lovely stuff, okay? Now we're talking the upward spread of masking. And why should this be a topic of concern to anyone? Because the biggest complaint with hearing aids is background noise. Ask anyone who wears hearing aids. And what's the most important sounds you want to hear with the hearing aid? Speech. And what parts of speech are the softest and hardest to hear? The consonants. And what are the consonants? High frequencies. Okay, now what's background noise? Mostly low frequency. Low frequencies mask high frequencies better than high frequencies mask low frequencies. Think about background noise as the bull in the china cup, or in the china teacup store, okay, in the china store. And the consonants, well, those are the china teacups. Easily smashed, easily masked. Let's put it this way: the rumble of a truck can mask the peeping of a canary much better than the loud peeping of a canary can ever mask the rumble of a truck. Okay, so let's look at our notes here, share screen, and we'll talk about what's up in this unit. So looking at it here, masking. You'll see critical bands. We're going to cover that a little bit. Binaural masking level differences, but mostly let's start off right now with masking. Masking has nothing to do with Halloween in this field. Masking is basically any sound that covers or hides another sound from being heard. In psychoacoustics, masking sound is usually put into the same ear as the signal. When people do research in masking, that's when they're looking at the upward spread of masking. You aren't looking at that, and I'm not looking at that. We've learned that it's true from people who did research in masking. And what they did was they had people either listening to a sound with a headphone and put masking sound in the headphone to find out what sound masked the signal they wanted to hear, or they had a person sitting in front of a speaker listening to a tone, let's say, and then from speakers they would produce masking noises, and they would find out what kind of masking noises best masked the tone in question. What noises masked the signal of interest? And they found out that low frequencies mask high frequency signals better than high frequency masking noise masks low frequency signals. Lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. They figured that out in psychoacoustics. You and I, we don't do that. We are hearing instrument practitioners. So we use masking in a different way. We use masking and we put it into the good ear to keep it busy while we test a bad ear. Because you might have somebody who's deaf in one ear. And if the person is deaf in one ear and you put in 10 dB, ain't going to hear it. 20, ain't going to hear it. 30, not going to hear it. 40, won't hear it. 50, it'll cross over to the other side. He's going to say, I heard something. But he didn't hear with this ear. The sound was enough to cross his head and get over to his good ear. Think of your head like a pail. It'll hold 40 decibels. Any more, it's going to spill over the sides. Okay? So in our field, you and me, we use masking into the good ear to keep it busy while we test the bad ear. So that sound can't cross over. Okay? And so we call that contralateral masking. Masking is put into the opposite ear to keep it busy while we test the bad ear. That's you and me. Research used ipsilateral masking. Masking is put into the two ears or into one ear, and the signal, the sound, is coming from a speaker or coming out of the headphone. So your masking noise is coming from the same side as the signal. And if the signal's coming in this ear, they're putting the masking noise in that ear to find out what kind of masking noise covered the signal. Enough on that. Let's move on and read our notes. And when we do so, we shall see. In audiometry, masking is put into the opposite ear, the non-test ear, to eliminate it from participating. This is called contralateral masking. In psychoacoustics research, masking noise is put into the same ear or ears as the signal, and that's called ipsilateral masking. At any rate, we care mostly about contra in our field and clinic, but let's look at what psychoacoustics did. Okay, because we have to appreciate that so that we know why background noise is such a pain in the butt for people wearing hearing aids. So the effect of masking generally is linear, and in English that means as we increase the tone intensity by 5 dB, to cover it we'd have to increase the masking by 5. If we made the tone another 5 dB, we need to increase the masking by 5. It's tit for tat, okay? For every increase in tone intensity, the masking sound has to be raised by the same amount in order to cover the tone. Here's another thing. Masking is usually done by bands of noise. Bands of noise. Now, how can I show that here? Well, pretend you've got a signal, okay, like this. It's a tone. To mask it, okay, you're using what's called, let me find out something small here that I can just kind of describe it with you. Okay, to mask it, we're going to use a band of noise in front. Okay, so instead of masking the signal with another signal, we mask it with a band of noise that surrounds the signal. So if this is 1,000 hertz, okay, we're going to put a narrow band of noise that surrounds 1,000 hertz in order to cover or mask the signal. So masking in experiments is usually done by what we call narrow bands of noise. Otherwise, it's hard to tell the masker from the maskee. It's hard to tell the tone from what the masking sound is. So if the tone is beep, the masking noise is going to be, okay, so you can tell the difference between the two. So that's why it says here, masking is usually done by bands of noise, not by other pure tones. A signal tone is masked by another tone of the same frequency would confuse the subject. Okay, so let's just look at psychophysical tuning curves. Now, not eighth nerve tuning curves that we studied last week and in anatomy class when we looked at the eighth nerve, not that. Okay, what we're talking about here is a different tuning curve, and these are called psychophysical tuning curves, and they show what's required in order to mask a signal. And like the traveling wave and the eighth nerve tuning curves that we've covered before, these are also asymmetrical. As you change the frequency of the narrow band masker, it becomes more or less efficient. In other words, you have to change its intensity in order to mask the signal. I'll show you in a picture, okay? Psychophysical tuning curves are behavioral and are shown in masking experiments. So let's just take a look at that. Eighth nerve tuning curves that we've covered are not behavioral. They are a neural phenomenon showing tonotopy of the eighth nerve. In other words, that specific frequencies are located in specific places. In other words, certain specific nerve fibers are tuned to one frequency better than they are the others, okay? That's eighth nerve tuning curves. Today we're looking at behavioral masking tuning curves, also known as psychophysical tuning curves. And guess what? These psychophysical behavioral masking curves match the shape of neural fiber tuning curves, same shape. So let's stop talking and start looking. Anyway, let's take a picture of hair cells again. Good old outer hair cells. Inners and outers. Make the picture big. Okay, inner hair cells, outer hair cells, normal. Move on to the next picture, damaged hair cells, mostly to the outers. Here's your outer hair cells working. You'd think we were in anatomy class. Well, the two courses do overlap like crazy, okay? Outer hair cells, remember, are the active cochlear mechanism. Look at how these outer hair cells pull down this blue tectorial membrane so that the hairs of the inner hair cells can get bent. Because outers are the moving part, they die first. Now remember, this action mainly takes place when sounds are softer than 50. Okay, because the inner hair cells, these couch potatoes here on the left, cannot pick up sounds below 50. If the sound is below 50, they need the outer hair cells in mechanical action to shrink, pulling down this membrane so that the hairs can get bent. If the sounds are greater than 50, well then there's enough fluid motion in the cochlea to bend the hairs of the inner hair cells by themselves. But less than 50, they need the mechanical help of the outer hair cells to help them pick up soft sounds. So your waves in the cochlea, this is an example of one traveling wave. And in this particular case, the client is hearing the frequency where my cursor is moving back and forth. Maybe the peak would happen here. He'd hear a lower frequency sound. If the peak happened here, he'd hear a higher frequency sound. In this particular case, he's hearing a low. These hair cells near the apex are the ones that are really getting this action taking place. And this is happening at the top of the traveling wave, okay? So, outer hair cells sharpen and amplify the peak of the traveling wave, as we've learned before. Okay, this guy can separate frequencies close together. This guy cannot. This guy has no hearing loss. This person does. This person has active, normal working outer hair cells. This person doesn't. So this is the guy who hates hearing aids. He has a lower frequency resolution, remember from last week? His ability to distinguish between frequencies close together is compromised. He can't tell the difference between frequencies close together, whereas this guy can. Notice the two-fold role here. One is the amplification of the peak, making it taller, and two is the sharpening of the peak, making it sharper. So we can restore number one with hearing aids, but we can't do number two. Okay, to make sounds like a bathroom. Anyway, to save number two here, to be able to sharpen the peak of a traveling wave, we can't. Okay, you can never do that again. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, and you know the story about the egg. Couldn't put it back together again. Well, what do we do for that person then? directional microphones, remote microphones, FM systems, anything to increase the signal, speech, compared to the background noise, because his damaged cochlea cannot separate frequencies close together, so he can't separate aided speech from aided background noise as well. So hearing aids, of course, not only need to provide gain or amplification, they also need to provide an increase in signal to noise ratio. And increasing signal to noise ratio is something that we do with directional microphones and all the peripherals that come with hearing aids. So always remember, hearing aids have a twofold goal: increase amplification and increase signal to noise ratio. We can't ever restore a sharpened traveling wave, so the only way we can help the person with the dull rounded wave is to increase the signal to noise ratio. Next. Okay, this is my little picture also showing the same thing. The sharpening taking place on top of the traveling wave, and that's the actions of the outer hair cells. The twofold thing, amplifying and sharpening. As we've said before in other classes, here is a normal unrolled cochlea on the top, and it's got two traveling waves. So the guy's hearing two frequencies close together. When you've lost outer hair cells, you've got the middle situation. And if you take a hearing aid and put it on that person, you have the bottom situation. I've been able to make the small, dull traveling wave into a larger, dull traveling wave, but I'll never be able to restore the peaks. Okay, that action is done. Hence, the person needs not only gain, but also an increase in signal to noise ratio. Now, eighth nerve fibers, we said last week and the weeks before, they're coiled like a rope, lows inside, highs on the outside. You can see that here. Fibers from the apex of the cochlea are deep inside the eighth nerve. Fibers from the base of the cochlea are wrapped more around the outside of the eighth nerve. And so the eighth nerve, like the cochlea, is tonotopic. Specific frequencies are represented in specific places. And we said that in order to tell that, we used tuning curve, eighth nerve tuning curves. And if you've got 6 of them here, which might represent 6 fibers chosen from this eighth nerve, and basically what you'll find at the bottom of each tuning curve is a point. And that point is what's called the characteristic frequency. And that means that's the frequency that the particular fiber in question is tuned to. Tuning curves. Okay? It takes least energy at this particular frequency to get this particular fiber to fire and send a nerve to the brain, or send a message to the brain. If I try to make that particular fiber, so we'll just pick on this one right here. Just pick a fiber. And you try and let's say its characteristic frequency is here. It's tuned to those hair cells, okay? Well, if we try to make that fiber fire with a lower frequency, we're going to have to use a lot more energy to get that neuron fiber to fire. And if we try to make that neuron fiber fire with a higher frequency, you're going off the chart. Okay, so you saw how eighth nerve tuning curves look a lot like a backward check mark. And we said last week as well, and in other classes, especially 120, eighth nerve tuning curves for normal hearing and sensory neural hearing loss. So here might be an eighth nerve tuning curve in black for a normal hearing person for some specific neuron fiber that we picked over here, okay? But if you've got hearing loss, you've lost outer hair cells, okay? So now you need more decibels to get that neuron fiber to fire. But secondly, look at the roundedness of the red tuning curve. See? Just like the traveling wave was more rounded, okay? Just like that's more rounded, the tuning curves are more rounded. In other words, more than just, look at my cursor, more than just one frequency is its characteristic frequency. Lots of different frequencies at around the same intensity can get that neuron fiber to fire. So the roundedness of the traveling wave is reflected further up the system, and it's reflected in eighth nerve tuning curves, and it's also reflected in masking curves, psychophysical behavioral masking curves. So let's talk about the upward spread of masking. Here's a rumbling of a truck. Look at that, the red traveling wave created by the rumbling of a truck across the street from your house. Blah, 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 blah. And here's Miss Canary in your kitchen. And I don't know why I'm saying miss, because singing canaries are male, actually. I used to have 3 canaries. I had 2 orange female canaries and a yellow male roller canary. Boy, that thing could sing. I even taped it. I recorded it. It was neat. Anyway, I know you came here to hear me imitate a canary. So here we are. You got a low frequency blah, 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 blah of a truck. And here's the canary peeping softly in your kitchen. Look at how the envelope of the traveling wave of the truck can cover up the envelope of the high frequency canary. The envelope of the traveling wave made by the high frequency canary in blue. But it doesn't work the other way around. If the truck is softly rumbling across the street, creating a small traveling wave near the apex of the cochlea, the canary can get hairy and merry and scream and screech all at once, but its peep will make its louder and louder peep will make a bigger and bigger traveling wave, but it's not going to go out to cover this rumbling of a truck. That's why we call it the upward spread of masking. Lows on the left mask highs better than highs on the right mask lows. Okay, so here's what I meant earlier when I said neural tuning curves and psychophysical tuning curves. They look quite identical, but we've hardly covered psychophysical tuning curves. So let's look at these a little more closely. This is it, closer up. Have a peek-see at this puppy. Okay, frequency is once again on the horizontal, and the vertical axis this time is decibels required to mask the signal in question. So in this case, we've picked 1,000 hertz, and you can see that right here. Here's 1,000 hertz. Okay, now what's the most efficient or best masker? In other words, I'll stop sharing here and show you my pencil and my piece of paper again. Okay? Here's the signal. Okay? Maybe I'll make it easier to see. Here's the signal, and here's the masking noise, the narrow band of noise surrounding the signal. So if the signal is 1,000 hertz, you want a narrow band of noise surrounding 1,000 hertz to cover that signal. And if it surrounds the frequency in question, then if the masker is made right here, now you can't hear the signal anymore. Beep, beep, peekaboo, I see you. No, you can't. Okay. Oh boy, I'm deteriorating big time. So now we go here. So here's that narrow band surrounding the signal, just like my paper did the pen. Okay, rock, paper, scissors. Anyway. So look at how the narrow band of noise surrounds the signal in question. Well, that's the most efficient masker. That's the best one. Why? Question mark. Because the fewest, follow my cursor, the fewest decibels was required to mask the signal. So if the signal was 50 dB and the narrow band noise was 51 dB, it will cover the signal, right? Good. Read the vertical axis, dBs required to mask the signal. Now let's say I try to mask that 1,000 hertz signal, but I want to mask it with a lower frequency. So now I'm trying to mask this but the narrow band of noise doesn't surround 1,000 hertz anymore. Now it's 500 hertz. Okay, well, I'm going to have to make that 500 hertz narrow band of noise, I'm going to have to make that really more intense in order to mask the signal. It'll mask it, but I got to make it more intense. Now let's say I'm trying to mask that signal with an even lower narrow band of noise. I've got to make that narrow band of noise even louder. And if I try to mask that 1,000 hertz tone with an even lower narrow band of noise, you can see the trend. The further I go away from the frequency in question, the more decibels I need to make that narrow band of noise in order for it to mask the signal. But if I'm trying, and that's when I'm going in a lower direction. So the best masker is this one right here. The second best one, of course, would be this one. The third best would be this one. The fourth would be this one. The fifth would be this one. Why do I say that? Because more and more and more decibels are required to get that narrow band of noise to mask the signal. So they're not as efficient as the narrow band of noise that surrounds 1,000 hertz. But the worst masker is higher in frequency. Because if I try to mask 1,000 hertz with a higher frequency of narrow band noise, I'll have to go to the moon to do it. And do you see the similarity in shapes here? Okay? This is what I'm trying to tell you. There's the masking psychophysical tuning curves, masking tuning curves, in other words, show you the decibels required to mask a signal. And you can see that lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. See, once again, asymmetrical. Now let's look at what happens with sensory neural hearing loss. Now we're looking at the red. Now look at the black. Look at how the black is like a backward check mark. Okay, that asymmetrical stuff. And notice how it's really sharp. Okay, this one masking signal is the best. Here we go, this is the best one. And none other ones are as good at masking the signal. Fair enough. Now let's look at sensory neural loss. Now once again, the signal has to be made greater because you can't hear it otherwise. You've got hearing loss. So now the signal's got to be made louder for you to hear it. But now let's look at what happens with masking. You've got the red curve, which is more shallow, less pointed. And in plain English, it means this signal that I'm circling here is more easily masked by a bunch of frequencies that surround the signal's frequency. Do you see how the masking curve got more shallow, more rounded, just like the eighth nerve tuning curve did here, and just like the traveling waves were here? Okay, so what you've got is this rounded traveling wave is reflected twice, like the flash of a camera. It's reflected higher up in the system, eighth nerve tuning curves, eighth nerve tuning curves, and it's even reflected behaviorally in masking experiments. Okay, psychophysical tuning curves showing a sharp point, whereas with hearing loss, the signal has to be made greater, but then as well, frequencies surrounding the signal are pretty equal in their efficiency at masking the signal, because there's no longer a big difference in intensity required to mask the signal like there was with the black line. Okay, so in other words, the person with hearing loss is more easily masked. He is more easily confused by other sounds around him or her that can cover up the sound he's trying to hear. His whole cochlea has less frequency resolution. The whole thing is just kind of like Your piano no longer has a whole bunch of keys. It's now got half as many keys, and the keys on the piano are double the width. It's not that the piano got narrower, it's just that the piano got less finely tuned. I guess that's what I'm trying to get you to look at when you're talking about upward spread of masking. So now let's look at our notes and see where we've come. Let's read this. Okay? Psychophysical tuning curves show the upward spread of masking. Asymmetry of the tuning curves show that lows mask highs better than highs mask lows. The best masker is the same frequency as the tone signal, or a narrow band, you should say, surrounding the signal tone frequency. The second best would be a lower narrow band of noise, but the worst masker would be a higher frequency narrow band of noise. So just as eighth nerve tuning curves are a reflection of the asymmetrical traveling wave, so also are psychophysical tuning curves. Your frequency resolution is reduced due to sensory neural outer hair cell damage. Psychophysical tuning curves lose the point and become more rounded. Where have we heard that before? Excuse me. Poorer frequency resolution means the signal will be more easily masked. So consider some signal that you want to mask, for example. For an impaired ear, the auditory system responds more equivalently to maskers of different frequencies. Background noise is the most common masker. High-frequency consonants of speech are most easily masked. No wonder those with sensory neural hearing loss are so bothered by background noise. Hearing aids cannot sharpen a biological peak in a rounded, passive, traveling wave. Now, this is high-level stuff, I know. And most IHS graduates, okay, from International Hearing Society are really not taught this. You are, because you're going to college. You have a 2-year degree. They have a 1-year distance ed paper. So you're learning more theory. You are also learning a little bit what they're teaching at Missouri State in Springfield, Missouri, because they have an AUD program. And this is the kind of stuff that they are taught. Well, sorry, I'm an audiologist, and I'm cramming some of this into you. But it's good for you. You know why? Because you may end up at a placement with an audiologist, and if you know something that the audiologist is surprised that you know, good. All right, why not? Make your tuition money worth your while. Here comes another break now. We'll leave upward spread of masking alone. Let's look at what they call critical bands. Critical bands. This determines the width of the narrow bands of noise, the widths. So let's look at it in a picture. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Fletcher. Fletcher was a researcher, an engineer, and he was trying to figure out what kind of sounds mask a signal. And here's a signal, call it 1,000 hertz. Okay, and here's a broad band masking noise covering the signal. Okay, call it a big band of white noise covering the signal. And as long as that's more in decibels than the signal, yep, can't hear the signal. Okay, cool. He then experimented and said, well, what happens if I cut off a little bit of it? Take away some of the lows and some of the highs. And what he found out was nothing. It stayed the same. Didn't affect anything. So he said, well, what if I take off a little bit more? And what happened? Nothing. It stayed the same. What if I take off a little more? Okay, nothing. That stayed the same. What if I, took off too much? Now I've got to increase the level of the noise. Okay. Oops, made the band too narrow. Now more dBSPL is required to mask the signal. So the noise will mask the signal, provided the noise has a critical bandwidth. Okay, these are called critical bandwidths. Remember, I'm not masking the tone with another tone, otherwise I'd just be needing to make them identical, but you're masking the tone with a broadband noise. And the broadband noise, as long as it's more intense than the signal, slightly more intense, it's going to do the trick. And that's all just fine and dandy, going from here to here to here to here. Okay, but if I make it too narrow, whoop, okay, now that narrow band is no longer good enough. I have to make it, see how, look at how I had to make it taller. Okay, so now this, you've exceeded the critical bandwidth. The critical bandwidths are about 1/3 of an octave in width. And this is being used in our field. So looks like this is the critical band in red. Looks like that's the one. Okay, now we use this in audiometry. When we're testing a bad ear with 1,000 hertz tone, and this is my good ear, remember what we said, pretend you're just about deaf in here. Let's say you have an 80 decibel hearing loss in here. I put 10 in, it won't hear it, put 20 in, won't hear it, 30, 40, 50, it's going to cross over. So I won't be able to find the 80 here, right? So I'm going to have to keep the good ear busy so that I can turn this up to 60, can turn it up to 70, can turn it up to 80 to find out the real hearing loss in the bad ear, okay? So the noise that I'm putting into the good ear to keep it busy was derived from Fletcher's masking experiments. And we use what's called critical bandwidths. So if the tone I'm putting in here, the noise is going to be a narrow band surrounding 1,000 hertz. That's about 1/3 of an octave in width. If I put a 2,000 hertz tone in the bad ear, the masking noise is a narrow band of noise that surrounds 2,000 hertz. And it's 1/3 of an octave in width. And if I'm putting a 4,000 hertz tone into the bad ear, the masking noise I'm putting into the good ear to keep it busy is going to be a critical band of noise surrounding 4,000 hertz, and it too is going to be about 1/3 of an octave in width, okay? So from Fletcher's masking experiments, we figured out the bandwidth needed for our narrow bands of noise that we use when we mask a good ear when testing a bad ear. And for those of you who think, what is he all going on about? Wait till you take Audiometry 130. Because in audiometry, you will learn about masking. And masking is done to keep the good ear busy in a hearing test when there's a big difference between ears. All right, share screen again and look at what our notes say about this. Critical bands, Fletcher. 1940s, a psychoacoustic researcher. Masking with a wide band white noise is not very efficient for masking a pure tone. Narrow band noise makes a more efficient masker. This is the critical band theory. And I'll tell you this too, obviously. If you've got, this is going to sound really loud because it's got all frequencies underneath the purple line. It's going to sound really loud. This will sound a bit softer. This will sound a bit softer. This will sound a bit softer yet. Okay, and as long as you can still mask the signal and you haven't crossed the critical bandwidth, I'd rather use this than this. I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. Okay, so why not just use this? Don't do that though, you're going too far. Okay, anyway, you can, let's just leave that alone. Let's look at here. So according to Fletcher, the term critical bands refers to adjacent internal filters in the cochlea, blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't worry about that. Without the sharpening action of the outer hair cells, the human cochlea has about 24 critical bands. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask any of that. This is just FNO for nerds only. I need you to know about critical bands in general. And I need you to know that you can narrow the band of noise only up to a certain amount before it no longer works to mask the signal. So those critical bandwidths are about 1/3 of an octave in width. That's essentially the gist of the bottom of the page here. Okay, so if you're looking at listening to the Zoom session, that's as much as I'm going to ask. You see, the people that don't watch the Zoom sessions are sitting there reading everything and not concentrating on what they should learn and what they don't really need to concentrate on. Lots of jargon about 1/3 octave bands in audiology, but basically you can read this. An octave band is when the highest frequency is twice the lowest frequency. So if the center frequency is 1,000 hertz, the low frequency edge might be 707 hertz and the high frequency edge would be 1,414 hertz. Critical bands are roughly about 1/3 of an octave in width, i.e. a third as wide as octave bandwidths. Slightly narrower for frequencies above 500 hertz, slightly wider below. Narrow band noise is used in clinical audiometry. Broadband noise is used to mask for speech testing, because speech is a broadband stimulus, so my masking noise for speech is going to be pink noise. Not white noise, pink noise. It'll have a spectrum that looks kind of like this, kind of going down on an angle. Follow my cursor. Remember, white has all colors in it, so white noise has all frequencies at an even intensity. Pink noise has mostly low frequencies in it, and the highs are softer. And that's like the spectrum of speech. So if I'm putting loud speech into a bad ear, the masking noise I'm going to put into the good ear is going to be pink noise. If I'm putting pure tones in the bad ear, the masking noise is going to be narrow bands of noise, 1/3 of an octave in width. Good. All right, and now you will get to binaural masking again. And this kind of brings us back to Unit 4 at the very end when we talked about reasons for having 2 ears. Remember we talked about having 2 ears? Why do you have 2 ears? 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. Okay, so if it takes me 50 decibels to hear and 50 decibels to hear here, binaurally, I'll hear at 45. Okay, if it takes 10 to hear here and 10 to hear here, binaurally my threshold will be 5. Okay, 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. Binaural summation. What's the next reason for having 2 ears? Directionality of sound. I can localize the direction of low frequency sounds due to tiny time differences of arrival to each ear, and I can localize the direction of high frequency sounds due to tiny intensity differences between the ears. So a sound coming from here is going to be a little more intense to this ear than it will to this ear, of course. So that's why another reason you have 2 ears is localizing the direction of sound. And then we said the third reason you have 2 ears is for the cocktail effect. Remember that? So let's review that, and then we'll bid ourselves adieu and say live long and prosper. So let's look at what we've got there. Binaural masking differences. We hear signals better in background noise with 2 ears rather than 1. This has implications for hearing aids and for listening in background noise. The cocktail party effect. Discriminating sounds in complex acoustic environments due to a source's spatial separation. In English, the phase of the signal and the phase of the noise in one ear is compared to the phase of the signal and the phase of the noise in the other ear. So there are 4 things being compared here. The signal and the noise to this ear, and the signal and the noise to this ear. And to speak plainly, you're at a cocktail party, you got a cup of wine in your hand, there's a whole bunch of people talking around in the room, you're not listening to them, you're trying to focus on the person in front of you. You'll be able to hear the person in front of you better with the 2 ears rather than just 1 ear. Because the 2 ears are comparing the signal and the 2 ears are also comparing the noise. And what are they comparing? The phase of the signal and the phases of the noise. So let's look at that in a picture, in a PowerPoint slide. Let's go to PowerPoint. Over, down, 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 Okay, you got some faces here. I'll make it big. You got 4 faces here. The top one is unhappy. And why is he unhappy? Get that black thing. There you go. The signal is identical to both ears, and the noise is identical to both ears. The signal is the top wave, and the noise is the noise wave, the jittery one. The guy on the second row is happy because, look, the signals are in opposite phase. Even though the noise is the same, the signal is in opposite phase. The middle guy is the third one down is unhappy because he's only got one ear. So he can't compare anything. So it's harder for him to hear speech in noise. And the last guy, he's happy because he's hearing in both ears, but the signal is taken away in one ear. So once again, something's different between the ears. Okay? And it's only in B and D that you can say that. A, everything's identical between ears, and C, he's got no other ear to compare. So he's out of the question too. And look at D. Remember I told you a couple of weeks ago about a pilot in a little airplane, and there's a lot of noise in the cockpit, and the pilot's trying to listen under headphones to the tower, and the noise in the cockpit is wah. The pilot will often take off one headphone and let it sit here so that he's hearing the noise in both ears, but he's only getting the signal in one ear. That often helps him hear or her hear the tower better. And that's a lot like this bottom picture right here. Okay, the signal, he just took it off, and he's better able to hear the signal once again. Isn't that weird? Okay, but take a look at that. Here's another scene. Same situation. You got 3 faces here. Okay? Same noise and same tones to both ears. Tone detection is poor. The middle one, pure tone, is inverted in one ear. Tone detection is good. And take a look at the third one. The pure tone is removed from one ear, and tone detection is good. So these are, as it says on the bottom, examples of listening situations in which a binaural masking level difference can be observed. Interesting, huh? And here's my drawing of the same thing, only I've got 5 heads here. And notice the top head, something's different. See how I got the signal in italics and not on the left? So there's something different here. And if you make the noise a little bit different, now I put the noise in italics and left everything else the same. Something's different here. He's happy. Or the third one, this would be like the pilot who took off the headphones off her head and left one on the ear and one not. This one's happy as well. And the bottom 2 are unhappy because the signal and the noise for the bottom one, these bottom 2 here, the bottom one here that I'm circling, everything's identical. And the very bottom guy, well, he's only got one ear, so he's got nothing to compare. Okay? So therein lies the problem. That's the end of your PowerPoint. That's about the end of this show. Let's go and look at our, well, not that. Let's just look at your notes and make sure we finish this, because I think we did. So you're looking at the cocktail party again. Okay, so we've covered this now twice in 2 different units. One at the end of Unit 4 and today in Unit 6. So there we have it. This is essentially your last psychoacoustics Zoom session for 110. So next week, and hopefully we can do it on the day that's normal, Tuesday at 11:30 Central Standard Time or Central Daylight Time, we'll hold our Unit 7. And we may take 1 week to complete it. More likely it may take 2 weeks. That takes us to the end of the semester. I always like to have a little bit of extra room that way, okay? So we've got a little bit of extra room here, which is good, and that's why I wanted to make up this Zoom session and for sure do the other one just last week Friday so that we're kept ahead of things here, so we're not lagging behind and trying to squeeze everything in. This way, we're right on schedule, if not a week ahead, which is good. So, you have covered acoustics before your midterm, we've covered psychoacoustics after your midterm, and Unit 7 is neither of the above. We're going to be looking at Unit 7, non-electronic acoustic modifications in hearing aids. And it's going to require some of your knowledge of acoustics that we covered earlier in this course. It won't touch anything to do with psychoacoustics, but it will help you to learn what the length of tubing does, what vents do in hearing aids, what filters do in hearing aids, all the non-electronic shapes, what the mass and stiffness does in a hearing aid to the transmission of sound. Okay, that's Unit 7, non-electronic acoustic modifications. Anyway, I'm done. Take that out. I'll stop recording and end the session. Here's hoping everybody watches.